Hey there, I'm Betsy Butler, and I am a course writer here at Teaching Channel. And I'd like to welcome you to the webinar on the 7 essential skills for literacy. I'm excited to do this because, as a former high school English language arts teacher, I often heard other teachers struggling to help their students with reading and writing. And in some cases, content area teachers may not have yet to have extensive training in literacy practices. And so, including activities that promote literacy proficiency in their instruction might be challenging. But in this webinar here, I will share some simple strategies by developing literacy skills across all subject areas, using 7 essential skills to build students' critical thinking and literacy skills. Hopefully, by the end of this webinar, you'll have new ideas for incorporating literacy skills in your classroom without a whole lot of extra work. So, some teachers might think adding literacy instruction to their classes is extra work, or that teaching literacy, quote unquote, is the responsibility of English language arts teachers. But really, literacy skills are a natural fit with most subjects. So, think about it. We read, we write, and communicate all the time in every aspect of our lives. Whether it's science, math, or even physical education, understanding and sharing information requires literacy skills. And when we give students these essential skills, they're better prepared not just for life after school, but for their current studies as well. By weaving literacy into all subjects, we're actually giving students the tools they need to succeed in the real world and to become lifelong learners. And that's why every teacher needs to be a teacher of literacy. Here's our list of 7 skills taken from the book Clearing the Path for Developing Learners by Peg Grafwallner. Now, as you look at this slide, I just really want you to review the list and see if there's anything in that list that you might find familiar or that you already do with your students or connections that you can make to your subject area. You'll notice these skills aren't tied to any specific subject or assignment. It means that you have the flexibility to incorporate them into any subject area and the creative freedom to teach the skills through debates, group projects, essays, or any other format of instruction or strategy. And chances are you're already working on some of these skills with your students. Over the next few slides, I'll share some basic descriptions of each of the skills and include a few ideas on how to incorporate each of those skills into your different subject areas. But these suggestions are just a few of the many possibilities. As you watch and listen, please feel free to jot down any ideas that might spark your interest. Learning to identify main ideas and supporting details is like planning a trip. And the main idea is your destination, and that's the goal or the message that you're trying to reach. Supporting details are like landmarks along the way, and they help you understand the destination better and add interesting information. So, just like on a trip, finding the main idea and supporting details helps you to understand where you're going and why it's important. And as I mentioned before, this skill can be used in any content area. Let's take math as an example. If you're solving a quadratic equation like x squared plus 5x plus 6 equals 0, the main idea is that you'll need to use the quadratic formula to find the answer. Here's how it looks like in more detail in terms of the supporting information. First, you figure out the values for a, b, and c in the equation. Then you plug those values into the quadratic formula, which looks like this. X equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac, all divided by 2a. And then finally, you simplify and calculate to get your solutions. Let's take a look at a Phi-Ed example. Students can practice this skill by keeping a journal where they summarize each lesson. The main focus of the lesson becomes the main idea, and the specific activities they did are the supporting details. They can also do this when they're looking at workout routines, where you would put the overall fitness goal as the main idea, and the specific exercises are the supporting details. Now we're going to look at composing a summary. Imagine you're writing a book report. You wouldn't just retell the story, right? You'd focus on the main plot points, the characters' motivations, and the overall message that the author is trying to convey. Composing a summary means identifying the key arguments, evidence, and conclusions of a text, and then presenting them in a concise and coherent way. Just like with the book report, a good academic summary should reflect the original source while highlighting its most salient points. So let's take a look at social studies. Social studies is a fantastic subject for practicing summarizing skills. Students can summarize a variety of texts, from primary and secondary sources to different perspectives on historical events or even news articles. Summarizing arguments and evidence is also a great way to prepare for debates. Science is another area where summarizing is super helpful. It helps students break down complex information into smaller, easier to understand pieces, which makes it easier to learn and to recall and remember. Students can then summarize the data from their lab experiments to form hypotheses, use online tools to summarize texts or articles, or even create presentations to show what they've learned about different scientific concepts. When we talk about using academic vocabulary, we don't expect students to sound like college professors, but providing ways for students to understand and use the specific words and phrases that are important to each subject. It's not just about knowing the definitions of big words like hypothesis or metaphor. Mastering an academic vocabulary helps to understand complex ideas and to communicate effectively with others. So think of it as your students building a toolbox of words. The more they have, the better they can express themselves and understand the world around them. Art teachers can support this by using art critiques and creating visual glossaries or journals, including definitions and sketches or diagrams to illustrate the terms. Regular group discussions where students use the academic vocabulary to talk about artwork can also be helpful. In Phi-Ed, teachers can weave academic vocabulary into their instructions. So, for example, instead of saying throw the ball, they could use terms like execute a chest pass or perform an overhead throw. Making inferences is about using clues from what you read to see or figure out something that's not directly stated. And it helps us understand what's going on even when we don't have all the answers spelled out for us. In science class, you can help students get better at making inferences by having them read science articles, research papers, or even parts of their textbook. Ask them to find the main ideas, the evidence that supports those ideas, and any conclusions the author makes that aren't directly stated. Then you can have them infer whether those conclusions make sense based on the evidence. Inference is also very important in math. It means using what you know along with logic and reasoning to figure out things that aren't directly told to you. This skill is really useful for solving problems and understanding math concepts. Students can also practice this by estimating answers to see if they make sense or by figuring out the pattern in a sequence of numbers. Learning about cause and effect is about figuring out why things happen and what happens next. We can see cause effect in stories. A character may make a choice, which would be the cause, that leads to an adventure, which would be the effect. We also see it in science. When plants don't get enough water, the cause, they may wilt, effect. Understanding cause and effect helps us to make sense of the world around us, whether we're reading a book or studying how things work. In world language class, students can act out skits or scenarios to see how one action leads to a consequence. For instance, they could pretend to be late for school and then get a reaction from the teacher. This helps them see cause and effect in action. In English language arts class, we can also see cause effect in how stories are put together. The beginning of the story often sets up a cause, the middle shows what happens because of that cause, and the end reveals the final outcome or the effect. Visual tools like T charts, flow charts, or even cause and effect chains can help students map out these relationships. These tools make it easier to see how different events in a story are connected. The next essential skill that we'll look at is to identify and understand relationships using compare and contrast. Learning to compare and contrast is about looking at two or more things and figuring out how they're similar and how they're different. Beyond that, compare and contrast skills are fundamental tools that empower students to think critically, make informed decisions, and succeed in both academic and real world contexts. In English language arts class, students might compare and contrast two poems by different authors, analyzing their use of imagery, figurative language, and themes. Then they might discuss how the poems address similar topics, but use different techniques to convey their messages. Math students might compare and contrast different types of functions, like linear and quadratic equations. They might analyze their equations, graphs, and properties to understand how they behave differently, and when each type of function might be more useful to model real-world situations. Finally, the last skill we'll look at is delineating and evaluating arguments. Imagine you're a detective investigating a mysterious event. You find clues like muddy footprints, an open window, and a missing cookie jar. You didn't see what happened, but you can use these clues to figure out the cause, what happened first, and the effect, what happened because of it. Students do something similar when we teach them about cause and effect. It's like being that detective, but instead of cookies and footprints, we're looking at events in stories or in real life. For example, art students can analyze an artwork to understand the artist's message or argument. Students can also compare different art styles to see how arguments are presented differently. To evaluate these arguments, they consider how effectively the artwork communicates its message, whether it's original, and how skillfully the artist used their techniques. In math class, students learn how to break down proofs step by step to understand how conclusions are reached. They can also look at different ways to solve problems and see why one might be better than another. Students then decide if the answer makes sense by checking the logic, seeing if there are other solutions, and figuring out if the same idea works for other problems. Let's wrap up by highlighting some of the key takeaways from incorporating the seven essential skills into your teaching. First, remember these skills are versatile and can be applied across all subject matters. Beyond the examples I've provided you, there are countless creative ways to do this. Second, you don't need to reinvent the wheel or completely overhaul your instruction to include these skills. In fact, you're probably already teaching some of them. Start small and incorporate them where it makes sense. You may even discover other fresh approaches to your existing content. Third, think of it like a ripple effect. Strengthening one skill can help your students improve in others as well. Students will appreciate focusing on similar skills in all their classes. Finally, these essential skills aren't just for English language classes. They empower students to become better readers and writers in all subjects, which is really something we can all celebrate. If you'd like to explore more in depth strategies and ideas for infusing the seven skills into your classroom, please check out Course 5360 called Boost Literacy and Critical Thinking in the Content Areas. It uses the text Clearing the Path for Developing Learners by Peg Graf-Wallner, and it includes strategies and templates for all educators to try when they are applying the skills in their classrooms. I'm so happy to have shared these skills with you and would love to hear how you can apply them in your content area teaching. To explore additional resources on this topic or to check out our featured course, visit the presentation notes at the K-12 Hub through the link below. Thank you so much for joining us today, and we look forward to working with you at the Teaching Channel. Bye-bye now.